Welcome to Matters Financial, Geopolitical from the Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. I apologize for my absence for a couple of weeks, but I'm back in my seat. Home thoughts. Let me start with this a video clip that Wolfgang Fengler tweeted on Sunday. Amazing way to present the world through your own DNA, Momondo, the DNA journey. And what's clear is that we are a mixture of all kinds of nationalities, and that there is no such thing as a pure race anywhere. Well worth watching. It's on the top link on Rich Wrap-Ups if you get a chance to take a look. Petrichor is a lovely word, and Etta Girl had it as a word of the day. Is the earthy scent produced when rain falls on dry soil. The word is constructed from the Greek petra, meaning stone, and ichor, the fluid that flows in the veins of the gods in Greek mythology. In 2015, MIT scientists used high-speed cameras to record how the scent moves into the air. The tests involved approximately 600 experiments on 28 different surfaces, including engineered materials and soil samples. When a raindrop lands on a porous surface, air from the pores forms small bubbles, which float to the surface and release aerosols. Such aerosols carry the scent, as well as bacteria and viruses from the soil. Raindrops that move at a slower rate tend to produce more aerosols. This serves as an explanation for why the petrichor is more common after light rains. Some scientists believe that humans appreciate the rain scent because ancestors may have relied on rainy weather for survival. I like this poem. I ask him about the poem with which his new book begins. How do you do it, said the night? How do you wake and shine? I keep it simple, said the light, one day at a time. I like this photograph from World Photography Day. That was tweeted by Christina Day. And then, interestingly, one of the most recognizable and merchandised images in the world has been that of the late South American revolutionary Che Guevara. The image is of his face. He is staring sternly ahead with a positive look. The look is further enhanced by the presence of an unkempt beard, a light moustache, and an equally unkempt flock of hair upon which sits a black beret. According to Michael J. Casey's book, The Legacy of an Image, ever since the late 1960s, this image has been reproduced by revolutionary outfits, political parties, painters, rock bands, and advertising agencies at the same frequency as famous Disney characters are produced. Nobody knew who had taken the photograph. Tricia Ziff, in her book Revolutionary and Icon, writes that it was only in 1980 that one was made aware of the fact that the image was part of a series of photographs Alberto Corda, a Cuban photographer, had taken in 1960. Interesting piece in the New Yorker, lo and behold, reveries of the connected world, and saying that the spiritual hint is reinforced by Leonard Kleinrock, a professor of computer science, who was present in what he calls the Holy Room on October 29, 1969, when a message was transmitted to the Stanford Research Institute host to host. That's when the internet first started. Turkey wedding bomb, suicide bomber who killed at least 51 was between 12 and 14 years old, says President Erdogan. People were dancing when the explosion ripped through the celebrations on Saturday in the city of Gaziantep, in the volatile southeast near the border with Syria. Celebrations were ending at the traditional henna night party, and I was in Malawi for a wedding. We had a henna night party there as well, when guests have decorative paint applied to their hands and feet, women in particular. Some families had already left when the bomb went off, but women and children were among the dead. Witnesses said, if Erdogan is really going to turn on Daesh, we're going to see a lot more of this. China and the US are approaching dangerous seas, says Con Hallinan. The tension between China and the United States is one of the most striking and dangerous themes in international politics, says the Financial Times. Earlier this month, China's Defense Minister Chang Wanquan said Beijing should prepare for a people's war at sea. Add to this the appointment of an extreme right-wing nationalist as Japan's defense minister, and the decision to deploy anti-ballistic missile interceptors in South Korea. And the term volatile region is a major understatement. Talking about the standoff over the Senkaku Dayu Islands, direct outcome of this treaty between the US and Japan, although Washington has no official position on which country owns the tiny uninhabited archipelago, it is committed to defend Japan in case of any military conflict with China. The Japanese Defense Ministry accused China of engaging in dangerous acts that could cause unintended consequences. From Beijing's perspective, Washington is trying to contain China by ringing it with American allies, much as the United States did to the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Given recent moves in the region, it is hard to argue with Beijing's conclusion. After a 20-year absence, the US military is back in the Philippines. Washington is deploying anti-missile systems in South Korea and Japan, and deepening its military relations with Australia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and India. Obama's Asia pivot has attempted to shift the bulk of US armed forces from the Atlantic and the Middle East to Asia. Washington's air-sea battle strategy, just renamed Joint Concept for Access and Maneuver in the Global Commons, envisioned neutralizing China's ability to defend its home waters. In spite of its upgrades, China's military is a long way from challenging the United States. The general US view of the Chinese military is that it is a paper dragon. In short, the US and Japan are not intimidated by China's new model army, nor do they see it as a serious threat. This is dangerous thinking if it leads to the conclusion that China will always back down when a confrontation turns ugly. I spoke about this in December 2013 when I wrote about the pivot to Asia bearing its fangs. And I said, given that the trajectory is one of gradual erosion of that decisive advantage, leads me to the view that this pivot to Asia has a logic and momentum of its own. Therefore, I see the US being increasingly determined to press its advantage. Omran Daqneesh was injured last week in an airstrike on the Katerji neighborhood of Aleppo. I'll put up the photograph that Getty posted. He was 5 years old, his face bloody and bruised from the bomb blast, stares out in bafflement at a world in which somebody has just tried to kill him. Pretty shocking picture, image, but it is also an information war. Every Syrian fighter is waging an existential battle that can only end in victory or death, says Petrichor. The complexity of the war was well described by one commentator as being like three-dimensional chess played by 9 players and with no rules. Every community in Syria feels it is fighting an existential battle that can only end in victory or defeat. In the case of the latter, there will be, as the French Algerians used to say, no alternative to the suitcase or the coffin. And then another interesting piece in the Huffington Post, the Syrian Badlands. And I agree with this, the core contradiction at the heart of the Obama administration's confused actions in Syria is seeking simultaneously to get rid of Assad and to suppress the jihadi groups. The simple, uncomfortable truth is that the rebel opposition to the Assad regime is organized by and overwhelmingly manned by Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, and affiliated Salafist groups, and the independent Islamic State both owe their successful development to the backing from Washington's allies Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. That continues to this day as the provision of arms, training, and the recruitment of reinforcements is made possible, the Al-Qaeda-led counter-offensive around Aleppo. Russian forces staged in Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other Persian Gulf states. Given that Russian forces are now staged in Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other Persian Gulf states are now at a greater disadvantage vis-à-vis Tehran. Should China be forced deep into the conflict, this may compound the already tenuous position of US allies in the region even further. I think that's true. Currency markets, the euro was last trading at 112.81, dollar index 94.90, area Japanese yen 100.82, Swissy 0.9635, the pound 130.41, the Aussie 0.7589, India rupee 67.13, South Korean won 11.2723, the Rial 320.68, the Egyptian pound 8.911, and the rand is backed up again. It's at 13.57. I'll put up the 3-month chart of the dollar index. The real area of key support is 93. I expect it to hold. Sterling, put up a 1-year chart there as well. Everyone is short. I think 127.99 will hold. I think you buy sterling with a 127.50 stop. PIMCO, China know how to turn negative yields into profits. This is about buying treasury bills in Japan. At the heart of the strategy is the world's insatiable appetite for dollar assets, which is presenting an opportunity for investors with greenbacks to spare. The chance to pick up extra yield, a luxury in an era of record low interest rates. For dollar lenders, even the 3-month Japanese bills, trading at a rate of negative 0.24%, offer juicy returns through a swap transaction that locks in exchange rates. We can, in some markets, buy even negative yielding assets and hedge them into US dollars to create attractive positive yields. Holger tweets, looks as if Deutsche Bank is the weakest link in the global banking world. CDS is priced highest among peers. Then have a look at this chart, which is Standard Chartered PLC, Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank compared over 1 year. And then let me read what I wrote over the weekend. Standard Chartered PLC and Stanchart Kenya are outliers, I said. Standard Chartered PLC is the parent of Standard Chartered Kenya. It has been a torrid period for bank stocks, particularly in Europe, where venerable banks such as Deutsche Bank and Credit Suisse have plumbed all-time lows. Negative interest rates have crushed spreads, coupled with higher regulatory capital requirements, have made this period one of the worst for shareholders. Stanchart PLC, however, has been an outlier. In Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers, he speaks of outliers as those who operate at the extreme outer edge of what is statistically plausible. Stanchart PLC has returned more than 10% this year versus a Stocks Europe 600 Banks Index, which is down 30% over the same dates, clocking 4,000 basis points of outperformance. Bill Winters, the CEO who visited Nairobi in May, said to get to a very exciting return, we'll have to get out of this very uncertain regulatory and economic environment. We know that we can make a lot of progress between now and those moments of excitement by just doing all the blocking and tackling and strategic repositioning that we've laid out. But we're still miles away from what we think is the value that our bank represents. Sunil Koshal, the managing director of Africa and the Middle East, said at the time of that visit in May, As markets dislocate, there is a massive opportunity. Investors agree with Sunil and also believe that Stanchart is poised and optimized to pounce on that massive opportunity. Stanchart operates in that fast-growing arc of Asia, ASEAN, the Middle East, and in Africa. In May, the CEO, Bill Winters, cited Lamine Manjang, MD of East Africa and Standard Chartered Kenya, saying, "You are role models for the bank." That comment was surely by signal par excellence. Lamine is ascetic, quietly relentless and sophisticated. Standard Chartered Kenya was founded in 1910, just behind KCB in 1896. I accept we are in a Schumpeter moment in the banking industry the world over. According to Schumpeter, the gale of creative destruction describes the process of industrial mutation that incessantly revolutionizes the economic structure from within, incessantly destroying the old one, incessantly creating a new one. But I'm saying longevity counts for something. Stanchart Kenya's return, and you have to account for a 1 for 10 bonus, the final dividend, and the 6 shilling interim dividend announced last week, is up 29.12% this year, and that is nearly 3 times better than its parent and 30 times better than the Nairobi All-Share Index. Stanchart Kenya reported first half earnings last week, where earnings per share surged 32.595%. Stanchart, alongside KCB and Citibank, have been key beneficiaries of the deposit flight to quality. Smart money decided it was more optimal to get your principal back rather than chase yield a while back. Stanchart clocked 85.4 billion shillings worth of treasury bills and bonds at the end of the first half of 2016 versus 62.6 billion last year. The bank's liquidity ratio spiked to 61.9% against the statutory 20%. Customer loans and advances were marginally down as the bank continues to focus on disciplined balance sheet management and more selective asset origination, said Lamine. Cost-to-income ratio ratcheted lower to 48.4% from 54.1%, and the platform is optimized to take further advantage of the new normal. You can imagine shareholders in the PLC thinking to themselves, "I will have some of that." I'll put up Standard Chartered share price data, link to it, and the first half results. And then finally, have a look at this. This chart highlights weak bargaining power of Renzi and the big EU game plan. Italy's banks in urgent need of recapitalization. This is the problem that we're seeing in European banks, about which I was referring. Gold, let's take a look at that. We're last trading at 1334, off those 1350 levels we saw recently. Crude oil is also off a little bit. New York oil at $48.40. Let's move on to Sub-Saharan Africa. The Angola president and MPLA leader, Jose Eduardo dos Santos, is seen in this photograph speaking at the ruling MPLA party congress in the capital, Luanda. Dos Santos was the sole nominee, won 2,543 votes on 99.6%. And I concluded by saying that's a Ba'ath Party type number. He was the sole candidate. Only 5 people voted against him, said Zenaida Machado. And I said that's a brave 5 people. Congo's opposition has rejected talks with Kabila over the election. That continues to sort of move towards a denouement. Zambia's opposition goes to court to overturn results of the presidential election. Under a new law introduced in January, the suit means Mr. Lumbu's inauguration, initially scheduled for next week, can't go ahead until the court rules on the matter. But with a final decision not expected until late September, the suit deepens political uncertainty in Zambia. I like this photograph by Michael Poliza, Wales and South African waters. South African all shares is up 4.1% this year. Dollar versus rand, we're at 13.57. Look at the 6-month chart. Egyptian EGX 30 up 19.22%. so far this year. That's all the optimism around the IMF's package. Nigeria is running out of firepower to defend the Naira. Foreign reserves keep on falling. They stood at 25.8 billion on August 16, the lowest since 2005. The currency fell to 350 per dollar for the first time on Friday. Nigerian all shares down 3.46% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange is down 9.22% year to date. The Tanzanian government is eyeing a major oil trading hub in Tanga. I wrote about this on the 16th of May when I spoke about the geopolitics of pipelines in East Africa. Last year I visited Tanga. I took this photograph from the air. Do take a look. And also I wrote about it in September 2015, saying the first point to note about Tanga is that it is geostrategic, the most northerly seaport of Tanzania, not far away from Mombasa. I have a strong conviction that the Indian Ocean economy is set to enjoy a renaissance and that the world's centre of gravity is tipping in its direction. Moving on to Kenya, UBA gets $1 billion from its Nigeria parent in push for big loans. Posted profits for the first time after 7 years of operations, increased its core capital to 2.1 billion from 1.1 billion. We have changed our strategy to push corporate banking, and for that we need capital to sell huge loans. KPA is unable to access 3 billion shillings deposited in Chase Bank. It has emerged that KPA flouted a Treasury circular instructing all state corporations to invest surplus funds in Treasury bills and bonds. Kenya shilling at 101.50. Nairobi all shares up 0.72% so far this year, vastly outperforming the NSE 20, which is down 14.31% so far this year. Bank Kalele, who's a friend and a blogger, writes on the Nairobi-Mombasa highway and its transformation. Long-time motorists on the road trip to Mombasa had endless savanna and semi-arid brushland as their only view. Few sizable towns and centres along the highway. Many travellers would drive the long stretch between Nairobi and Mtito Ende, or even up to Voi, before deigning to stop for refreshments and use the sanitation facilities at what were mostly only petrol station joints. Many of the colonial-era taverns and inns along the highway had fallen either into disrepair or closed completely, and a night in Voi meant accessing the adjacent Sava East National Park to stay in Voi Safari Lodge, not anymore. Talking about a great change in the landscape along the highway. Do take a read. I wrote about the Mombasa-Nairobi Highway, January 2013. I was talking about my Christmas holiday ritual to jump into a car, take the family down to the coast, the Nairobi-Mombasa Road. I rose into immensities, and it's impossible to believe it retains a near mystical hold on my imagination and connects me to my childhood and beyond. Dad used to once own an Alfa Romeo, which there were only 3 in the country at that time. And my pilgrimage along that road started then, when we used to come from Mombasa. Now, of course, we set off from Nairobi, but the road still has its hold. Landmarks still reach out to me. The time we were swarmed by doves near Imali, which was breathtaking. The eerie and deserted, very Oscar Niemeyer building, which might have been a petrol station with a restaurant. Makindu, which is like being teleported to Amritsar. On New Year's Day, it was packed to the rafters. Stopping at Mackinnon Road, where there is a shrine which houses the tomb of Saeed Bagali, a Punjabi foreman at the time of the building of the railway, who was renowned for his strength. Put up a photograph that I took of that somewhat eerie and deserted petrol station. I also like this photograph of flamingos on Lake Bogoria. 2 photographs, both again by Michael Poliza. And then on Saturday I had lunch at the Radisson Blu. As I was waiting for my host, I took this photo of the reception area. And it's pretty funky. Once again, thank you for stopping by.